So within the Zero Trust Exchange, there are several facets of how TLS inspection works. The first off is access control, the URL filtering, the cloud firewall functionality, being able to apply policy based on the request and the response. The second part is around compromise, the actual payload that's coming from the web server or towards the web server in terms of things like malware inspection, preventing viruses, the advanced threat protection, the IPS signatures, as well as cloud sandbox functionality to be able to inspect the content that's being downloaded and thinking about the peer-to-peer communications that come as part of infected machines talking to their command and control services. And then also being able to make decisions to move users into an isolated container that protects the user and the web server from attack. And then there's the data loss or the data protection side. Inline DLP means scanning the payload that's coming from the client to make sure that nefarious users or accidental users are leaking data out to the internet. Being able to provide granular application controls, not just on the FQDN, the URL that's being accessed, but across the entire URI that's being connected to. And that enables us to do things like tenancy restrictions, restricting a user to a specific Office 365 tenant, to enable us to allow policy based on the file type that's being downloaded and control that. And that might also flow towards the sandbox controls as well. So we've built this platform to do all of this at scale, assuming 100% of the transactions will be SSL and 100% of those could be decrypted. And we need to be able to do that, generating those intermediate certificates at line speed for all users and all locations. So how does that work? So if you look at this on the left-hand side, where Zscaler Internet Access is a forward proxy, we're doing SSL man-in-the-middle inspection. So the client makes a request to the website and the Zscaler Internet Access Service Edge sits in between that. There is then a connection from the service edge to the originating web server where we receive the server certificate back. And we'll do validation of that server certificate, making sure that it's signed by a trusted issuer, the date is valid, the issuer is valid, and the content within that certificate is valid. And then we will generate a certificate on the fly signed by a trusted issuer and provide that certificate back to the client. So as far as the client is concerned, they're getting a certificate for the web server, but we're generating that on the fly, and it's called a man-in-the-middle certificate. When you look at how we do this with Zscaler Private Access, on the right-hand side, Zscaler Private Access is in essence a reverse proxy. So we become the web server that the user is connecting to. So there's a client hello towards Zscaler Private Access, and then there's a connection from the app connector to the application where the real server certificate is provided to the app connector. And so the app connector or the Zscaler Private Access Service Edge provides a real server certificate back to the client. So that real server certificate may be the same server certificate from the application, or it may be a certificate that was specifically uploaded to the private access platform for those websites that we are proxying through us. So Zscaler Internet Access is a forward proxy interception, and Zscaler Private Access is essentially a reverse proxy SSL termination interception. So let's dig in a little bit deeper onto how Zscaler Internet Access SSL inspection works. It starts with a connect request, a client request to the proxy. And so in an explicit proxy with a pack file, there is a connect method. That connect method will say connect www.google.com, or in a transparent mode with Zscaler Client Connector, there is a client hello. So the client does a DNS resolution. They make a TCP 443 connection to the website, and then they send a client hello, which is the SSL handshake method. And that client hello has the SNI, the server name indicator for the website. So at this point, the Zscaler Internet Access Service Edge has the indicator to tell us what the FQDN that's being connected to is. And so it makes a connection at step 2 towards the server, and it sends its own client hello, and it receives the server certificate back from the web server and completes the SSL handshake. So we now have a connection encrypted from the Zscaler Internet Access Service Edge, or the ZEN, towards the web server. We'll then inspect that certificate and make sure that it's valid. It's signed by a trusted issuer. The names on the certificate match the name that was requested, and the date is valid for that certificate. We will apply policy on that as to whether or not that transaction will be allowed, and then we will generate a certificate on the fly signed by either the Zscaler Certificate Authority or the private certificate authority uploaded as part of the SSL inspection configuration. So the Zscaler enforcement node then provides that spoofed certificate back towards the client, and then that goes to the web browser or the client application on the user's machine, which will then validate the certificate itself. That certificate validation will then be against either the Zscaler root certificate authority or their custom root certificate authority, and the SSL handshake is then completed at step 7. So now we have two SSL connections, one between the client and the ZEN, although the client believes they are connected to the web server, and one between the ZEN and the web server, where Zscaler is in charge of those two communications, and we can inspect the content that's being passed through the Zscaler enforcement node. So if we look at the certificate chain, the certificate that's provided to the client in the bottom here is wikipedia.org. That is the man in the middle spoofed certificate. It's generated on the fly. And that certificate is signed by the Temporary Intermediate Certificate Authority, which is a 14-day expiration. It's rotated every 7 days. That is held within the Zscaler Central Authority and distributed to the ZEN and only ever held in memory. And then there's the Zscaler's Intermediate Certificate Authority that issues that certificate. That's only ever held in the Zscaler Central Authority. And then the Zscaler Root CA, which is held offline and the private key is never exposed anywhere. If you take an example where a custom certificate is used, in this case my welshgeek.net certificate, my certificate authority is held within my Active Directory. That private key is encrypted. It stays within my organization. I issue a intermediate certificate authority towards Zscaler, which is uploaded. Again, that is only ever held within the central authority database. And the central authority issues that temporary certificate, which can then be distributed to the ZENs that need to do the inspection. And then the man in the middle certificate is issued on the fly, signed and issued by that temporary intermediate certificate.